'Twas 2 weeks before Christmas or somewhere about that time. This guy can't keep track of time. That somebody hadn't made a present for his wife. And he noticed that his wife was not around the house. It was all quiet around the house. Not even a creature was stirring. Not even my dog. I told my wife I was going to make her a Christmas present. This was a big mistake because she is like a detective and she can figure just about everything out. At first I thought I was going to use some reclaimed pallet wood and cut it up into nice blanks, which I did do. I cut them into nice blanks, but then I did some thinking and realized, and some research on top of that, that pallet wood is sometimes coated with stuff. You just don't know the history of what's soaked into that wood. And probably not the best idea for a cutting board that's coming in contact with your food. I figured if I'm making my wife a cutting board, she'd probably like it if it didn't poison her or anybody else that ate the food that she cut on it. So I dug around my wood stash, and as you probably know if you've watched any of my videos, I use a ton of pallet wood. So most of my wood stash, which I have a lot of it, is reclaimed wood. But it did turn out I had a piece of walnut that is not from a pallet and it's not reclaimed. It's a beautiful piece, but it's only one piece. So I'm gonna make use of this. And I also found this lovely piece of oak, and I think I can use this as well. Another thing that I found out as I was researching it, it turns out you're not supposed to use every type of glue out there because not all glue is food safe or for indirect contact with food safe. And well, it just turns out I lucked out that my glue that I had around my shop is in fact FDA approved for indirect food contact. Woohoo! I really was very fortunate with that. So let's get into the project.
The length of this board is a defining factor in the overall dimensions of the finished cutting board, though I could always go smaller.
My thought at this point, to be able to use this walnut wisely and create kind of a cool pattern, is that I liked this light wood right here. By putting these two pieces together, it's the same piece, you saw me cut it in half. Putting these two pieces right here creates sort of this, what looks sort of like a river of light wood down the center of this, the darker hue of wood out here. Now, to add a little extra width and a little extra design to it, I'm going to add some oak. Now, there's a few ways I could add the oak. The way I originally was leaning towards was cutting this and cutting two strips down here. So I put oak here, walnut, oak, walnut. But then it would have been out of balance with this side. Knowing who my wife is, she likes things symmetrical and balanced. So I'll cut out a chunk of wood here, put the oak here, cut out a chunk here, put the oak here. Now I could just put the oak on either side and call it a day, but I feel like that's making it too easy on myself. So, my thought is then, because this piece of oak I have is 1.5 inches, I'll do 3/4 inch wide pieces, 3/4 oak, 3/4 walnut. You kind of get the idea. Now let's see if I can do it.
Here once again I'm using one of my favorite bandsaw tool hacks, and that is using a circular saw clamp guide, and well, I can use it as a rip fence, and that's what I'm doing right here. Unfortunately, these edges, even though they may be straight, will need to be cleaned up, as it is a bandsaw, so it means it's going to be a lot of work with the hand planer. Now, what I don't show here is I'm regularly stopping and taking a small square, trying to make sure these edges are square with each other, so that hopefully everything will line up well when it comes to the glue up, which, spoiler alert, it does a pretty good job, but there are some gaps I have to correct. We will address those a little bit later. As you probably could guess, I had to do all the edges so that the glue ups would work well, so that means both the oak and the walnut. Now, I would highly suggest not going to the gym beforehand or any physically intensive tasks beforehand, because this is quite an arm workout.
Okay, time for the glue up. Here is the thin walnut piece that goes on the side. Okay, what I'm trying to do line up here is the pattern in the walnut. I want it to match the pattern over here. So I just lined it up here. I'm just putting on the other side of the oak, so I know this is the way I want to glue it up. Okay, so now I just need to add glue and clamp this up like an insane man with as many clamps as I can fit on there just to make sure everything stays together. Let's get on with the gluing. I just really like picking the dry glue off the glue bottle. I don't know why. Even though it says Gorilla Glue, it's not really Gorilla Glue. I just reused the bottle. I used the Type On we talked about earlier. I'm not sponsored by either of those companies. I just happen to use them. And again, as I said earlier, the Type On 2 said it was food grade, so that's kind of an important factor. Or as in for indirect contact with food. So it should be fine for making this cutting board. Putting a whole lot of glue on. When I clamp this, there's going to be a lot that's going to squirt out and I have to clean it up. It's really important that I get good coverage with the glue, even if I waste some glue. Mainly because I'm also trusting it for its bond versus using like dowels or biscuits or something else like that, which would be another option, but I'm not really set up to do that. So I got a bar clamp and a short pipe clamp. I thought I had a second short pipe clamp somewhere, but I'm not sure quite where. So I'm going to use some of my better quick clamps as well. I'd rather use all pipe clamps if I could. Also trying to make sure my boards are lined up. I'm going to start tightening these up. These quick clamps don't nearly put enough pressure on. I'm just going to use this really long bar clamp here. I just don't want to mess up this glue up. There we go. Okay, so the glue's set overnight. Now I'm going to take off the clamps. It's stuck to the tabletop a little bit. This side will take a lot less planing because it's pretty close to flat. This side, on the other hand, I need to do a lot of planing. So I'm going to clamp this down and I'm going to get started with the hand planer.
Back to the arm workout, I was glad for a few hours rest before jumping into this part of the project, as this is quite labor intensive. I have a thickness planer, but unfortunately it's down. I need to repair it. That would make a task like this probably a lot easier, but you gotta do what you gotta do to make something work.
Using the hand planer away from the clamps works so much better. I've knocked off a lot of material here and a lot here. I still have more to go.
One of the more difficult parts of this project was actually that the board kept walking away from me while I was using the hand planer. There's got to be a better way to go about it, but I'm not quite sure what that way is. Now, remember when I was talking about making sure the boards were square as I was hand planing them before the glue up? Well, you can kind of see this small gap here. I'm trying an experiment where I'm trying to push some glue in, and then I'm going to fill it with surrounding sawdust. So I'm going to push it into the crack, sand it, push the dust in, and probably do a few coats of this in order to make sure that this gap fills up the best it can. Unfortunately, even though I tried, the edges weren't perfectly square, so that meant the back corners did not align as tight as I wanted them, as I don't want a gap in these cutting board seams or joints, because I do not want food particles or let's say tomato juice from cutting a tomato seeping in between these two layers. I just want to make it so it's easier to keep this cutting board clean. Here I'm actually using some sawdust from hand planing earlier.
That's looking pretty presentable now. I'm gonna have to let it dry, and I'll revisit this later with the random orbital sander and cut off the ends, sand the sides, and it should be done then.
So right about now, I realized that, hey, if you leave sawdust all over your workbench when you're using a random orbital sander, it will blow it all over your shop and make everything more a mess, so it's better to actually stop, clean up your mess, then get back to sanding. So the goal with this sand is to get it super smooth before adding the oil for the finish. Oh, and I can't forget to sand the edges as well. Nobody wants to get slivers, so I'm going to sand these well, and I'm also going to put a slight round over by using the sander on the edges so they're not such a sharp corner. Off camera later on, I cut the ends so that they're all flush so they line up well. You can kind of see in this footage the ends don't line up perfectly.
So it turns out my wife had this sitting around already, so I'm going to use this. I couldn't find a cloth to apply this with, so I'm going to use paper towels. I think that'll work fine. I love this wood grain. the oil just pulling out this grain and making it even more obvious.
As you can see, this is the first coat. What I'm not necessarily showing you though, that is after this coat, I let it set for hours as it soaked into the wood grain, and you could see when looking at it that it could actually use a little more oil. So I applied a whole nother coat, let it set for a few more hours, and then added yet another one. I don't remember how many coats total I put on it, but it did take quite a few to get the finish I wanted.
This was my first cutting board build. I made it for my wife, as I said earlier, for a Christmas present. I hope she enjoys it and it serves her well. I only had one other piece of walnut, so that was kind of the one other piece I could use for this cutting board because I needed something about this thickness. I didn't want it super thick or super thin, so this was kind of an ideal thickness. Now, if I was going to rate this on like a difficulty level, on a scale of 1 through 10, maybe about a 3. Only reason why I'm saying that is because it took a ton of hand planing, which is a muscular workout. You could use something like a thickness planer, which would decrease the amount of work. My thickness planer is broken, and that's why I didn't use one. That would have made things a lot easier. Also, a joiner would be easier too. I don't have a joiner. Trying to get these joints to line up well is a little bit of a tricky thing to try to deal with. Anyways, comment down below. I'd love to hear from you guys. Hit the thumbs up button. That would be greatly appreciated. And subscribe so you can keep up with other projects and other content coming out shortly. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in future videos. Bye!